Welcome, everyone, to the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sami, joined by Angela Belford. Today, we're going to be wrapping up our series on syndrome or superpower, and today's topic is perfectionism. Ooh. So, big surprise, we are going to start with why. Why perfectionism? Why are we talking about this today, Angela?
Well, this whole idea came to me several months ago, so I've been really noodling it for a little while. And some of it I was noodling because in my book, I kind of people ask me what's the benefit of reading your book? How will people know that they've gotten something better? And I'm like, oh, well, you can overcome imposter syndrome and perfectionism and procrastination, all these things. And then it's like, really? Are you sure that that's what they'll overcome? So that's what got me thinking about it, was when I was talking about why you would want to read my book too. And then also just seeing the effects of perfectionism and how it shows up. I think also for me, a lot of the kind of symptoms or traits of perfectionism is celebrated in our culture. And so, I'm not this giant Enneagram fan, but Enneagram 3 is the achiever. And I love in that book, he says being an Enneagram 3 in America is like trying to quit drinking, being an alcoholic, living over at a bar. It's very difficult. And so I think that perfectionism is sort of in that same achievement space. We celebrate productivity. I have said often that while I, was early diagnosed with alcohol abuse, I turned that, my ism to something that was much more socially acceptable, workaholism. And therefore my achievement is actually often celebrated, and I get my needs met by achieving goals, and all things, as we talk about, can be positive, and they can be taken to the extreme. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, perfectionism.
Yeah. So in case you are new to this idea of perfectionism, which I don't know, to those of us in it, feels far-fetched in this American society that we are currently in. However, not everybody faces this. So let's start with let's continue with sort of what it is, and let's break it down a little bit more.
I do want to shout out to, we said American culture. I really want to say Western culture, because some of our top countries are UK and Canada. So shout out to our peeps that are listening to this that are not just Americans. Actually, I love that, our international audience. So I think it's Western culture. I could probably bring on some friends from some other places in the world, and they would be like, whatever, it's even worse. I can think of specifically a culture that this is probably a very revered character trait. But the actual definition, the definition that I like, that I found from Psychology Today, is perfectionism is a trait that makes life an endless report card on accomplishments or looks. When it's healthy, it can be self-motivating and drive you to overcome adversity and achieve success. When it's unhealthy, it can be a fast and enduring track to happiness.
Unhappiness.
A fast and enduring track to unhappiness.
Not a fast track to happiness.
Indeed. That is definitely, we do not want, it is not a fast track to happiness.
Freudian slip for what our brains try to tell us.
Definitely. And we could get into even more in depth. I love Brene Brown, and she definitely talks about, she has a segment where she says that she was visiting with some women, and she told them that she was studying shame, and they were like, oh, I don't do shame. When you talk about perfectionism, get back to me. And she's like, all perfectionism is rooted in shame. So we'll get into that a little bit more later.
So if we're going to talk about shame later, what do you want to talk about now? Where do you want to start? So many different places.
Indeed. Let's start at the beginning, which is not where we always, sometimes I start with the end in mind, but in this case, it was definitely not. I 1000% started my adult journey in life with perfectionism. I say adult journey, that's kind of dumb to say that, because I would say that my perfectionism is probably rooted in abandonment. Holy crap, I don't think I've ever thought it in that sentence. I don't think you're supposed to be like that on a podcast. Um,
Live therapy
because,
right here.
whoa, yeah. Well, so for me, I started with wanting to be good so that people wouldn't leave me. So, my mom died when I was 8, and then I went and lived with this family. And while at some level you can understand in your brain, oh, well, your mom died, of course you had to go live somewhere else. I mean, in some ways you can't understand it because your dad left before my dad left, before my mom died. And I didn't get to stay with the family I knew. I had to go off to Ohio, which I know have processed this trauma. It was the best thing for me. I'm grateful to my family for having that wisdom, all those things. But when you're a little kid, you're just like, oh, crap, now what do I do? And then I get to 13 and they're like, oh, you should go and live with your biological mom because that was only your adopted mom that died. And so then I go and live there, and you're just trying to what do I have to do to make sure people don't want me again? And then a couple years later, mom divorces stepdad, who wasn't safe, if you read the book. And then we lived with my grandma, and then my mom decides to go live with her drug dealer boyfriend, who I knew was not going to be safe. And by this time I had enough of a brain to go no, thank you. So I wanted to stay with my grandma, just graduate high school. And I then go to college let me back up. In high school, I was very, very, very poor, as you can imagine. In my small town, no one saw poor people as pretty. So didn't get a lot of attention, didn't get asked out on dates, didn't really get asked to, I did get asked to prom. I did have a boyfriend, but he lived in another city. And so just the self-image that kind of created was oh, I'm not pretty. I can't be pretty and poor. I'm not saying that was my conscious thought. I'm saying that's kind of the message that I got. And then I get to college and everybody's poor. It's broke college student, right? And suddenly, oh, people are giving me attention because of what I look like and how I act. And really not on achievement necessarily, but definitely I was in honors classes and that sort of thing. And so then I meet a guy, get engaged, find out I'm pregnant. Suddenly in my head, I am just my mom all over again. And I needed that kid to be perfect because then I was a good mom. And hope y'all hung with me for a long context to be you have to act right, be right, speak right. I can remember a therapist when I don't remember what I said, but his answer was, she's 2. What do you expect? And that was when he recommended a mom mentor. And I was like, I expect that she is not obnoxious and crazy and all the things. And that she doesn't call me mama, because remember, that drove me crazy. My name is Mom. It's not mama. That was all perfectionism. And then I needed to win the car and do well in Mary Kay and become the director and all the things. And then finally it all crashed and I had big giant nervous breakdown, which began my journey to healing from perfectionism and shame and all of the things. Shame says there's something wrong with you. People don't even want to be around you if you're not perfect, and which is not, I'm not saying that's what the message they were intending to give me, but that is just what I made all of that mean. So then fast forward to this little child that I had being like a teenager, and I could see her struggling with perfectionism. And my like so emotionally aware and attuned self would just be like, Sammy, your mom doesn't need you to be perfect anymore. Your mom has gone to therapy and is healed. You don't have to be perfect. And I can remember you asking me going, Mom, it's so weird that you talk about yourself in third person. But I didn't know how to equip you. I didn't know how to give you skills. All I wanted to do is just tell you, stop doing that. Stop doing that. You don't have to be that way anymore. So anyway, apparently you don't remember those things because you kind of tell your story as like you discovered, kind of awakened to the idea of perfectionism. So tell us about that. Set us some context. That's the kind of backstory. What's it look like from your journey of perfectionism?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it does feel like these stories are both we sort of talk about like which one comes first, the back, historical, like but I also think that the chronological story or not, but I on my journey, I remember where I was, I remember when it was, I know who I was with when I sort of awoke to this awaked, woke up.
You were the fish that noticed that you were swimming in water.
Yeah. To this idea that I struggling with perfectionism. And I was on a road trip to go to the national convention for the sorority I was in as an alumni. I was with my friend Michaela. We had stopped in Alabama at our friend Samantha's apartment, and I got into a fight with Chris. I think we were married. Well, yeah, we were definitely married at this time. And something about that fight like broke me, and I don't remember the words that were said, but it was sort of just this like glass shattering moment, and I just started crying, and then I didn't stop crying. I like eventually fell asleep, and I woke up the next morning, and then Michaela and I got in the car to drive from Alabama to Florida to go to Orlando. I think I cried like 80% of the car ride there. At some point I was Googling like how to make your eyes less puffy after crying for 12 hours. Some of the answers, by the way, is you get like tea bags and you're supposed to like put it on your eyes so that can sort of like absorb the puffiness. However, it was like green tea. I couldn't find green tea at the gas station, so I got ginger tea bags, which was a horrible, horrible idea. Like it burns. Then I'm like, now I'm crying in pain because
Emotional and physical tips right here.
I spent most of the week like on and off sobbing, like the whole week of national convention. I was a wreck. I have people who tell me stories from that week that I'm like, I have very little memory of that time. It was just so difficult. And I think part of what was really difficult was basically I felt like I had just unearthed this like huge like mess, this knot, this tangled. I often use a gardening metaphor, which is not quite as intense as it emotionally feels, but it's sort of like uncovering a root system for weeds that have just been growing in your garden. And it just was this huge, huge mess. I was like, how am I ever going to untangle this? How am I ever going to be able to undo this or heal from this or grow from this? It just was overwhelming staring at this problem and just seeing all the different ways that it had impacted my life in all of these different areas. I can tell you now that that was 2017 when that happened. So math, 6 years.
6 years.
6 years. And little by little, worked the problem to be a lot smaller. And I think it basically is you got to start somewhere. You got to start with a little bit of it and then keep going. But there was a point later that fall where I was talking with one of my coworkers about just sort of realizing that I struggled with perfectionism. And I remember we were in the hallway at work outside the bathroom. She was like, but Sami, like, why do you have to be perfect? I just don't understand. I was like, I don't know. I just feel like I have to be perfect. And she's like, no, but like really, there's got to be a why. Like, why do you have to be perfect, Sami? Sami, why do you have to be perfect? Why do you have to be perfect? Why do you have to be perfect? I was like, I don't know, because my mom needed me to be perfect as a child because everything in her life was falling apart. So I had to be perfect. And that's just what happened. I don't know. And I was like, oh crap, I gotta go to therapy. Like I just immediately like burst out and was like, I don't know, because my mom needs to be perfect. And it was like, oh gosh, that is like a really big revelation. And it's like 2 o'clock on a work day. I gotta go back to my desk before I just completely lose it. Thanks, Carrie, for that big life revelation outside the bathroom. And also, that was a lot, but that was also sort of the first point for me realizing and kind of putting two and two together of where a lot of perfectionism stemmed from was that, I don't know, need as a child. Like, no, there's a lot of things that are chaotic and going all around, and you are not going to be one of them. You are going to be like put together, and you're going to have all these things, and you're going to do the right things and say the right things. I think it's interesting also comparing our journeys, and that I don't feel like I had a lot of the same struggles on like my looks being perfect. I was pretty anti makeup in high school. Like, I'm gonna wear whatever I want to wear, even if it looks ridiculous. Like, yeah, I'm
In
gonna wear
high
my
school, wait,
well, yes.
that
I mean, all of, but in high school is where you really start to make a lot of
yes.
you're like, these are only my decisions and no one can force me in
Wait,
any other way.
but I just have to tell the fun story. When Lexi was born, there was a season where I was up with her at night. And so Barry would get up with you in the morning and get you ready for school. And I remember one day, kindergarten, you got off the school bus and I said, Sammy, did you wear that to school? And you were like, Mom, I just got off the school bus. Of course I wore this to school. And so like and then you had headgear in fourth grade and your hair would just be everywhere. And I would just be like, I would say things like that were proof that I had like come a long way on my perfectionism journey, is because I could be like, okay, if you don't want to brush your hair, then you don't have to brush your hair.
Hey, that one did come to a head at some point. You eventually were like, no, this is the line in the sand. You have to brush your hair or I will cut it. This was sixth grade, and
Mm.
sixth or seventh grade. She stood by it. Because I did not cut my hair, or brush my hair
I
got
love that you
cut.
said she stood by it. Not like you stood by it.
I'm telling the listeners, like, everybody be on my side. She drew a line in the sand. She cut my hair off, and I've never had it that short ever again. And I unfortunately, it is one of my weird perfectionism things, in that like my hair has to be brushed all the time. And we talked about in the ADD episode that I always have a journal within arm's reach. I also have a hairbrush constantly around me. I didn't think about that being a perfectionism thing. Golly, that stinks to figure that out. Now
Now I'm not
do I
the
have
only
to
one
stop
doing live
brushing my
therapy.
hair.
No, you don't.
Anyway,
That's hilarious. I would like to say that we made that decision together because you also donated that hair to somebody.
I got excited to donate my hair, but then what I didn't realize is that they were going to have to brush it anyway. It was the worst. And it was like, I mean, literally, she said, like, you have a rat's nest on the back of your head. And it was, I mean, it honestly and objectively, it was like a rat's nest on the back of my head. But then they brushed it out and it was so painful. And anyway, but now it did start this is a nice little tangent, whatever, unrelated to this, but I do donate my hair like every 3 to 4 years. That's all I do, is I just grow it out, cut it, donate it over and over again since the sixth grade.
There
So
you go.
perfectionism.
I remember the day that you had that breakdown outside the bathroom, because I think what was even made it just a little bit bigger deal is that particular coworker and I had had coffee several times, because she and I we have different chapter but same songbook childhood stories. And so it was like, oh crap, you actually know my mom. Like, it wasn't just a random coworker. And it was like,
Right.
there was an element, it felt like from my seat when you were telling me about it, was like, I'm so sorry, Mom, I told on you. Kind of
Mm,
weird feeling of like, and this is unfortunate, but like it often, we see this show up a lot in families that have a lot of shame stories, right? So whether that's based in alcohol or financial trauma, or if that's drug addiction or all sorts of things. And while ours were lesser degrees than the shame stories I grew up with, they're still, next generation. You don't break these cycles without some bumps and bruises along the way. I also remember, because I hold that day as like the paragon of my moment of like, I actually have done my work,
It
because
wasn't me mismatching my clothes that was the sign of you doing the work, but this day.
yes, sorry, the day that you had the child, yes, I had done a lot
Yes.
of work with the allowing the mismatched clothes and allowing the rat's nest to get as deep as it was. But on the day that I really I hold closely as one of my biggest successes, which when you're an achievement-based person and you're driven by goals and you're driven by, accomplishing things and accumulating things, and to say that this is one of my proudest moments in my life is that night when you like came over and you were crying, where, went and sat in my bed, and I was just holding on to you, and you're just crying and telling me the story. And I said, yeah, Sammy, yeah, your mom did need you to be perfect. And whatever I need to say, if I need to apologize again, because I feel like I've apologized, but if I need to apologize again, if you need to hear words from me, I'm happy to share, to give you those words. I caused those injuries. It's now your responsibility to heal. And I think that is something that parents struggle with, because here's the alternative. The alternative is I could have said to you, and I probably have many, many times before I had done the work, oh, I know, I'm so sorry. I just made a mess of things and I just made that whole situation about me, and I made you now responsible for my emotions. And in that moment was probably, I feel like, one of my most adult moments to say, like, I'm sorry. Please, if I need to ask for forgiveness again, I was doing the best I could. I wish I wouldn't have inflicted those wounds, but it's your responsibility to heal. And I will walk through the darkest days with you. When you're on your journey of healing, I will hold your hair while you emotionally throw up. I will get you a washcloth. I will sit with you. I will hold your hand. I will get better at not being afraid of people crying. I will, like, all of those things. I will walk with you on your journey, but you have to take the journey. And so sometimes I think I stop that story just too fast, because I am willing to walk on the journey with you. And sometimes walking on the journey means you got to hear like the hard impacts of the words you said. You have to hear, and it is so tempting. And in that moment, do you think that after Sammy went home, after you left, that I didn't call my best friend and be like, this was the hardest thing I've ever had to like sit and be with and sit and listen to, just listening to the pain that you caused and not in that moment making it about you, is like probably one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do. And so valuable, so worthwhile. I guess I should
Yeah.
let you say.
No, I definitely think so. And I think that even from your seat, it still feels valuable. And I
Yes.
think that when we think about, relationships with your adult children, I think this is an area where parents go sideways a lot, is that when your kid does talk about if their childhood was hard for any reason, that can be heard as a parent to be like, well, I was doing the best that I could. What do you mean that your childhood was hard? What do you mean this thing happened? And yet sometimes we can just validate,
Yes.
and it doesn't have to be about you. And also completely appropriate and expected that when your child then leaves, you'd be like, oh, trusted confidant, please help me. Like, oh my gosh,
Yep.
I need to offload some of this. By all means, like sharing the burden, but that doesn't have to be shared with the person who is impacted and kind of going through it.
The other thing, I've had another experience where with one of my other children, where they had to share a really hard truth about something that I'd done that had impacted them. And in that situation, I said, do you want to hear what was happening with me at that time so that you understand the context of my reaction? It does not change. I absolutely see how painful it was, and I see you. I see that. I'm very sorry. Please forgive me. Would it help you to make sense of it, to hear what was going on in the background and to hear what I was thinking? Because sometimes we're imagining these terrible things that our parents are thinking, and it doesn't have anything to do with us. And so in that moment, I
Or we don't
asked,
know the whole context
you don't know the
because
context.
you're a kid and there's parents, and maybe your parent just got fired,
Yeah,
or maybe something
right.
like there's so many different
Yes.
things that could have happened that you may not
Yeah,
know.
right.
And yeah.
And so, I was like, at that moment when that incident happened, I was contemplating divorcing your dad. Oh yeah, I wish you would have divorced dad so many times because you guys fought so bad in junior high for me. And I was just like, okay, well, we're just going to go all truthful. Anyway, so sometimes it is appropriate to offer to the child the opportunity to hear more of your side of the story, if you can do it from a place of purity, of saying, like, I'm not justifying, I'm not discounting your feelings. If you want to hear what I saw on that situation, I'm happy to share it with you. It's real tricky. It's really tough. It's super hard to do, not to just be like, oh yeah, well, you want to know what's happening with me. And to me, if you haven't done your work and you haven't worked through your own emotions, then the most safe thing to do is just like, honey, that sounds like it was really hard. What do you need from me? Do you need me to apologize? On that note, we've talked about false memories here. And also I can remember Sami was 12 or 13 and we had a little scuffle. I know, hard to believe, but we had a little teenage scuffle, and she stomps upstairs and I said, I'm going to go write down what just happened so that when you're in therapy and you've made up some big story about what just happened, then your therapist will have the real story, which is pretty passive aggressive. Can I
So
just say?
passive aggressive and
So
like a
passive aggressive. I
hilarious,
am not
like, I'm gonna write this down so your therapist in 10 years will have the real story. Slam! Like, I don't know. It's just like of all the things
and
that you could
the
yell after
intent
your kid.
the intent was not at all to be passive aggressive, but now I'm sitting here laughing that, like, super passive aggressive. But the intent behind it was, I know it's funny because I think about, like, I'm learning so much about how as kids we process things from a little kid's perspective. You will hear the word little kid perspective in my second book so many times because I talk about, like, how we make stuff mean. And so I was already becoming aware of that idea. But I also know that when we're in trauma, we make up all these stories and we make it mean and we tell all these things to ourselves. And so that was kind of the intent behind it. Funny, your response was priceless because you were like, Mom, you should not affirm, because y'all know I was positive thinking and all about affirmations. You should not affirm that we are going to need therapy. And I'm like, oh, you for sure will need therapy because you were raised by humans. Of course you're going to need therapy. So we normalized therapy at an early age in our family.
That's so funny. Let's talk about other ways that perfectionism impacts us.
Yeah,
Are
that's
there
just
good things? We could go on for a long
no,
time
no, no,
about
no.
bad things with perfectionism. But I mean,
Well, I want to start by, before we go into like bad things. So, this whole thing was whether
before
or
we go
not,
into bad
I
things,
mean, before we get into like the good things, sorry.
oh, I was like, we've been talking
uh
about bad things for a while.
we were talking about our anyway. So in this series, though, we're talking about the idea of is this a syndrome or is this a superpower? And it's not labeled as a syndrome. We have the imposter syndrome, the attention deficit disorder, right? Perfectionism. Nobody calls it one of those little words. It's just an ism, right? And we celebrate it often. But anyway, Dr. Paul Hewitt, shout out to the University of British Columbia. He actually has a lab for this called the Perfectionism and Psychopathology Lab. lab. I'm so excited. There's a nerd like me that is studying the negative effects of perfectionism. And I think that before I go into the good, he has a really great compare and contrast between perfectionism and conscientiousness. And, we love the word nuance around here. And we also think a lot about the idea of something that can be good that goes to the extreme of negative, right? So he talks about if you are perfectionist, I forget what he calls it. He's like some type of something with perfectionism tendencies or whatever, but you receive no satisfaction from any performance. So that's like at one end of the spectrum, like you perform, you do well, and you don't receive any satisfaction. I thought that was a good indicator light, like if you're accomplishing things and not really feeling satisfied. Conscientiousness, by contrast, is you do experience satisfaction when you've done a good job. And so his contrast is to say, like, conscientiousness is good, and it's sort of the lesser intense version of it, and kind of an indicator light for you that, like, oh, I did a good job, and I feel satisfied with that. The extreme perfectionism experiences no rewards from any. Conscientiousness rewards self and others for good performance. Perfectionism maintains expectations in the face of failure. So even if you fail, you still are just going to keep trying, versus conscientiousness, you can change up your expectations. That didn't work out so well. Maybe I should edit that. Perfectionism is motivated by a fear of failure. Conscientiousness is motivated by a desire for success. And then the last one is that perfectionism to the extreme focuses on flaws as an indication of self-worth, and conscientiousness focuses less on flaws. So I love a spectrum. I love the idea of even like changing our language, because sometimes what I hear from perfectionists is that so you want me to just be mediocre? I'm like, no. Can we downgrade it to conscientious?
So I feel like, and this is a preliminary thought, not a scientific one, that perfectionism has an ism because it is more closely related to addiction than disorders. I personally have experienced where like you get the sort of like high like feeling when you are achieving really well and when you continue to perform very high capacity, that does feel more like an addiction, and having to turn off that response and recondition that feeling, that experience like that. I don't know. Maybe it's an ism because it's more like workaholism, alcoholism, perfectionism.
Sure.
And within our society, it's a super, super accepted addiction to have. It's very highly rewarded. Corporations feed off of perfectionists. Honestly, they're going to eat you up and spit you out because you're willing to give all of your worth to put together a perfect product, a perfect presentation, do all these things. Heck yeah, we're going to use and abuse that, and we're going to lean into it. We're not necessarily going to encourage you to, it's okay if you make mistakes, and it's okay if you aren't, if it's 95% perfect, not 100% perfect, that's okay. That's not what business the business, like the corporation, like the corporate person.
Well, all right. So that's two different segments. So let me start with the first one, which is interesting that you talk about that it's an ism because it's addictive, because the definition by Brene says that perfectionism is 4 things and there are 5 things it is not. So her compare and contrast: perfectionism is self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels the primary thought, if I look perfect, do everything perfect, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, blame, and judgment.
Mm-hmm.
She says it's not striving for excellence and healthy achievement. It's a defensive move. Perfectionism is an unattainable goal. And it's more about perception, what other people's perception are you of you. She says it's not self-protection because we can't really protect ourselves from what other people think about us, which I thought was a really interesting. And to your point, perfectionism is addictive because we invariably do experience shame, judgment, and blame. And so if we believe that it's because we're not perfect enough, then that's like faulty logic. And she says it's not self-improvement because you're trying to earn approval at its core. And you're really looking for praise for achievement and performance versus believing that you have value as yourself. And
Yeah, I think maybe a pushback I have on that is that like a perfectionist is going to experience maybe all of those. Like every single thing that I do may not be um a symptom of my perfectionism. There are times where I'm going to be a high achiever, and I think it's more about like the internal motivation. On the
yes,
outside, it might look the same.
1000%
We
yes.
talk about this a lot, but even
Yes.
like that's not to say that 100% of my actions are only motivated by are people going
100%.
to judge me or not. And so the way where it's like this is what it is and this is what it isn't, sure. And I might experience all of those things. And some of those things are characteristics of perfectionism, and some of those things are not, which is where it's hard to unpack when you're trying to recover from it. So maybe that's where the separation of those things, like you don't have to let go of like doing good work for good
No.
work's sake. Like, and that is our part of been that has been a part of my journey, is trying to figure out, when am I pushing too much? When am I pushing the right amount? When am I stretching and growing? When am I overexerting and just trying to get the praise?
And I will tell you that it's similar to the other isms you mentioned of workaholism and alcoholism. I've literally said to people, there are days that I can drink beer because it tastes good with pizza. And there are other days that I am turning to beer because I have had a stressful day. I just want to relax. I want all those things. And, go back to the intuitive eating episode, and they would say, that's fine too. I have to watch my motivation because I have a tendency to use alcohol to numb my pain. Then I have to be a little more aware of that. And we some of us use food to numb our pain.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the time that's okay. And so perfectionism and workaholism, sometimes I just have a lot of things that I want to get done. And I am motivated by delivering on my promise to people and by doing the things that I say that I want to do. And other times, I love what you're saying. The exact same action,
Mm-hmm.
no one else can see, no one else can know that I'm just like, oh, they're going to give me extra praise. I'm going to only work on this client. I'm going to work on this client first because they're the ones that tell me how great I am all the time. Right. And so I think you could have the same action in the same day and it could be motivated. That's why any of these things that trip us up is like, what is the motivation behind it? What are you trying to run from?
Yeah. So we didn't actually get to the good side of perfectionism. We should address that before we wrap up the episode. Is there a good side? Is there a benefit?
I read an article by Rebecca Knight, Harvard Business Review. And one of the things that, I don't know if this is necessarily a good side, but it is an antidote, I think. And she talked about the idea of measuring and recognizing the point of diminishing returns. Like if you are working on a presentation for work, if you have a tendency to perfectionism, you might check in with somebody when you think, oh, it's not even close, and let them see, oh no, yeah, it is pretty close. And thinking about if you spent 5 more hours making it every single dot perfect on that presentation, is the return on that investment worth it? It's interesting you say corporate America is celebrating this, because there you can get to a point where it becomes detrimental, because then if you can't get to all of your work because you're trying to make all of your work letter perfect, and you don't recognize, I shouldn't spend that extra 5 hours, I should spend 1 extra hour and make sure all the spelling is right and make sure the fonts look right. And Rebecca points out, even creating a checklist for yourself. If you have a trigger in an area that you're like, oh, it's when I do these presentations or when I do proposals or when I do whatever, then like create yourself a little checklist to say, yep, I did all of those things. But really recognizing the law of diminishing returns. I mean, the upside is that if it is healthy and you are coming from a place of healthy achievement, then striving for excellence, there's nothing wrong with excellence. There's nothing there. Like, I think that that's a beautiful thing. And I'm a huge believer in evolving as a human. I will never be perfect. And so is my motivation to fix a flaw so that people will like me more, and fix a flaw so that I will not have any negative thing happen to me. That's not going to be positive. But I I would offer up to you that the mom that was raising you when you were 2 was not the mom that could have said, yes, I made that mistake and I'll walk with you while you heal. Absolutely, that evolution, that drive for excellence has served me very, very well. And we do live in a culture where it celebrates achievement. And so if you can get that internal motivation lined up, then yeah, you can be very successful in all the ways that we all love to be successful in.
I like it. I also, for me, there is a redefining of perfect that has had to happen. And particularly like in parenting, that's probably an area that I have had to do a ton of work around. Um, I I think I've taken a step forward on I don't expect my kids to be perfect, but I definitely, especially after Henry was born, I had to be perfect. And if I couldn't breastfeed well enough, like that directly impacted my value as a mom because I was not able to perform in these ways. Which is sort of silly looking back because my body does not produce food for my 4-year-old, and it has no value on my status as a mom. But whenever he was 4 months old, I very much so thought that was value. Anyway,
Can we just affirm and validate that that is a very normal thing that moms, especially brand new moms and nursing moms, that it's something totally new and totally
yes.
different, and our brain doesn't like to do different things. And so while looking back, it may seem silly at the time, and for anybody that's going through it now, it is not silly at all. It's very typical, and we're here to love you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I think where I have grown is redefining being the perfect mom for Henry. That does not mean that I like have achieved all of these things, or that he has the most put together birthday parties, or that his dinners are all homemade and gourmet, or that he never watches screen time and I always give him 100% of my attention and never look at my phone. Like, I don't know, whatever it might be that you're saying, like, well, I have to do this better. I am the perfect mom for Henry because I like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. That that kid has my whole heart. And even when he says things like this morning on the way to school, I don't like my mom. I don't like my mom. I don't like my mom. An actual true story, by the way, on the way to school this morning. And I was like, why do you say that? It's because I love dad. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Didn't he a few weeks ago say that he was the best mom? Can we just talk about that for a second?
Yeah, he said it was his la.
Yeah.
In any case, I am still the perfect mom for Henry. Like, I think that's it. I'm the perfect mom for Henry. I don't have to be a perfect mom to be the perfect mom for Henry. Um, I don't know. There's just like a reshifting in my brain. And also the perfect mom for Peter, not leaving him out, but Peter is 7 months old and does not chant, "I don't like my mom" at me. So he's easier emotionally these days than Henry could be. Um anyway, so I think that for me is a redefining of perfect can be
Mhm.
helpful.
I
Yeah.
like it. One side note, the some of the research that I did, Google knows what my search history is. So when I start typing perfectionism, it automatically filled and ADD
Mm,
because we just did the article, or we just did the episode on ADD, and the prevalence of perfectionism and ADD. And there's like you could have a whole podcast just dedicated to ADD. So, but I just
I'm
want
sure there
to.
are. I'm
There
certain that
are,
there
there
are.
are. Yes, there are. I know people that are ADD coach. Then, um, but here's the thing: is that sometimes perfectionism looks different because there's actually a couple of
Oh,
types
yeah.
of perfectionism. Which the one that's most interesting to me is the avoidant perfectionism, which is like, if I can't make it perfect, then I'm not going to do it. And then procrastination also being a symptom of perfectionism, because if you wait until the last minute, then you've reduced and you'll give yourself justification for why you can't do as good a job on that. So anyway, it also specifically talked about women with ADD, and the link to perfectionism is off the charts. So they said that part of the perfectionism comes from when we are undiagnosed, especially ADD, so we don't know how to manage. We have a lot of shame from all the balls that we've dropped over time. So I thought that was interesting.
And
And
it goes right back on it's very similar to what we talked about last week with the societal expectations of
yep,
women and fit it. And like one thing I didn't really bring up last week, you you have sometimes it is dangerous. It can be like people experience violence whenever you are not the nice, happy, well, like woman that like you don't respond nicely to the person in the parking garage, and then something horrible happens to you. Like there's part of this that is not just like, oh well, somebody was mean to me. Like, no, we see other women experience horrific things because they didn't comply, they didn't smile, they didn't, I don't know, whatever it is. So like I just want to add that like sometimes the fear in the back of our heads is not like it's from nowhere and completely unfounded. If you're not a woman or you don't understand this experience, there is an element of it that like, no, like I have seen stories and I've watched other people. I've seen somebody go on a run and like anyway, whatever it is. That's another whole little tangent. But just I want to say it's not like it's an invalid experience to feel like you have to fit into a box sometimes. And it does definitely contribute to perfectionism and play the part. Um, there was a long while in my perfectionism journey where I would just sing the songs of Frozen, um, which was also Henry's favorite movie at the time. But Elsa, like her journey is perfectionism and it's conceal, don't feel, put on a show, make one wrong move and everyone will know. Um, that literally, when we talk about soundtracks in your head, that was the soundtrack in my head for a while. And Anna, who's like, I don't get it. Like, just like be you, be all these things. And it's like, no, it's dangerous. Like everything could come crashing down. And then look, I showed people the inside for half a second. Haven't seen Frozen, and everything came crashing down. Like, this is terrifying. I have to go run away. Yeah, I definitely had a runaway plan when I was new mom with Henry. So, like, literally, Elsa was my, I don't know. I just was an expression of how I felt at the time. Not to say that's a good thing. And,
it ain't bad.
and it
If
was
it's
true
how
for
you
a while.
coped, if that's how you coped,
Yeah.
that is not bad. Fantasizing about running away is not a bad coping skill.
Yes. And it is, if you are experiencing feelings like you need to run away, like please talk to somebody and get help
Yes.
because mine was in it got so intense it was definitely like in the self-destructive category. While I was not suicidal, it's still I fell in the same a very similar category of self-harm. because of my desire to run away. And I even like when you talk about like, do you have a plan? Do you have intent?
Right.
I knew the ATM cash withdrawal limit. And I knew the radius that I could drive in my car. Like I had a plan, I had intent, I had a whole thing.
Yes, all I mean is don't shame yourself for any of this. Get help.
Yes.
1000% yes, get help. Interesting, because the part of what Dr. Hewitt, the reason why he's studying perfectionism is because the most extreme forms actually do lend themselves to suicidal tendencies.
Mhm.
And it is very dangerous if it goes unchecked and it goes untreated. Often what I want to do on this podcast is expose people to ideas and hopefully pique their interest enough that they will go do more research, dig in. I want to normalize going to therapy. I want to normalize that we're all in the same boat and that we're all on a journey. So thanks for letting me talk about syndrome versus superpower.
Yeah, I think this has been fun little mini series for us to sort of talk about things and hopefully revealing to all of you listening and just learning more about us as well. I feel like, we sort of shared a lot of our own stories, but if you guys have stories, we really want to hear them. Tell us how any of these things, imposter syndrome, ADHD, perfectionism, tell us how those things have impacted you. If you have advice or tips for others, you can also send that to us. We'll reshare them.
Yep.
And yeah.
Speaking of the people that we're talking to, we would love to grow our audience, and it's super fun. Anybody that has started something, and it's fun to talk about being a perfectionist and not knowing if you'd be good at something and not know if people were going to listen or would like it. And so we have actually rolled out a new website. It is the letter B and then freakingawesome.com. It is not BE, freaking awesome. We love Arlene, who owns that domain, but we are at freakingawesome.com, and you can find us at the .com, and you can also find us on Instagram and YouTube for those locations.
Facebook and LinkedIn.
So we are going to do some drawings. If you go to the letter B, freakingawesome.com, and you register for what?
Wait, drawings like we're going to draw pictures or like giveaways?
Thank you, Sami. We are going to give away some Be Freaking Awesome gear. We have t-shirts, we have hats, we have beanies.
We have mugs.
We have mugs. Yeah, we have all sorts of cool stuff. And so we're going to have a drawing, a giveaway of some cool stuff. So if you want to get registered, and what we'll do is every increment, we'll work this out, every increment of number of new followers that we have on our email subscriber list, then we will give away some gear. So go and register at the letter B, freakingawesome.com, and get your name in the drawing. Get it in early, because then as we add new followers, then you will be in there for a long time.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening today. We'll put all of these links in the show notes. You can also find them on the website at the letter B, freakingawesome.com. You can find all the links there. For now, we hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and go be freaking awesome.